My name is Pastor Chad Mills. I'm the senior pastor at Apostolic Tabernacle of the Felicianas, and I am here today to introduce you to a good young man by the name of Noah Sagely. He's a member of ATF, was raised in this church, but he has quite a dramatic testimony of the faithfulness of God and the mercies of God. I feel that it will relate to so many and that it will be encouraging and uplifting to you. So today, go with us a little bit on this journey, and I believe that you will find this can be a help to you. Possibly you may even share this video with someone else. Introduce us to Noah Sagely. I know you. Many your fellow church members, they know you, and you may have friends and family, they know you, but there may be somebody that's watching today that don't know much about who Noah Sagely is, or may not know you at all. So won't you tell us a little bit, Noah, about your background, including maybe even your childhood?
Well, I'm Noah Sagely. I'm 23 years old. I was born and raised in ATF. My dad is the associate pastor of this church. I'm fifth generation Pentecostal on both sides of my family. So I've lived this Pentecostal life my whole entire life, from birth up until, when I strayed away and all those types of things. But from the age of 10 years old, I received the gift of the Holy Ghost right in the corner of this church. And at 14, I accepted my call to preach. And I thought that was really what God had in store for me, and I still believe that. But, throughout life, you have certain things that come up, and you struggle with certain different types of things. And at age 16, I lost my grandpa. But before that, I had already struggled with a spirit of rebellion against my parents, against my church. And I just, when I lost my grandpa at 16, and that was just my excuse for every mistake that I was going to make. I used that as an excuse to stray away. So that's just a little bit about me.
Awesome. Noah, what up to that point that you talked to, that in itself, the heritage, being raised, on a church pew, and the heritage you got, and like you said, fifth generation, it's such a rich heritage all the way around. I'm very thankful for that heritage, because one of those generations that preceded you preceded me as the pastor of this church. And so I'm so thankful for that. If this was the end of a book, at that moment of time you're talking about, I remember when you was 14 years old, when you came to that office and you asked to speak to me, and you didn't come really as a 14-year-old. You came as, to me, it was like a mature individual. And I remember just like yesterday that you said, I've got a call of God. And I'm like, what do you feel like God's calling you to do? And you was like, to preach, to preach this gospel. And I can remember of wanting to do everything that I could to protect you, because I still wanted you to be a kid. I wanted you to, even though I felt like the hand of God was on you, and I remember those times that you would get behind the pulpit at 14 and 15 years old with me as your pastor, and the tears would flow down your face, and you would preach under the anointing of God. So if we close the book right then, what a testimony. What great things. But tell us a little bit about what happened. It's what derailed you, what changed and caused you to stray away from the right path, and what path did the devil lead you down?
As I mentioned earlier, after I accepted my call to God to preach, I started struggling with rebellion. I started, looking at other kids being able to do certain things that I might not have been able to do, and it kind of built up a resentment in me, and I didn't really know what to do with it, because I loved this church and I loved being raised in this. But then, as I mentioned, the hurt of losing my grandpa kind of just added fuel to that fire of resentment and rebellion and all those types of feelings that I really didn't know what to do with at 16. So at 16, I started hanging around the wrong crowds, doing things that I knew I shouldn't do. But it numbed what I was hearing in my mind for all those years before, the pain of losing my grandpa, the rebellion. It numbed all that. It shut it up, because when you give in to the devil, he's going to stop fighting you. I mean, you're doing what he wants you to do. So at 16, I started smoking weed, drinking, doing things that I knew I shouldn't do, but it felt right in that moment, and I thought very little of what it was doing to myself. I just thought I was having a good time, and then one Saturday evening, I stumbled into my great-grandpa's bathroom. He had already passed, and I found hydrocodones, and I was 16, 17. I didn't know what they were. Looked them up. They were pain pills. And what do? I try them for the first time. And that first time, it didn't really grab a hold of me. And I think that was the grace and mercy that God was trying to extend out my way. And it didn't really grab a hold of me. And I still dabbled in other things. I began to, become an avid weed smoker every day, drinking every weekend, all those things. And then by the time I was 17, getting closer to 18, I had basically ruined the relationship with my parents. I was always fighting with my dad, always getting in trouble at school, and then I wound up getting expelled from high school. And my parents took it as best as they could, as any parent would. For I got caught with weed at school, and I got expelled. And my dad took it as best as he could, as best as he knew how, because that's something he had never dealt with, never something he thought he would have to deal with. I'm the youngest of 3 children. My 2 older sisters, by this point, one was already married with kids, and the day after I got expelled, actually, my other sister was planning to get married to her husband that she's married to now. So it was a completely different change of how their kids had reacted, how they had acted before me. And then I started homeschool. I never did a day of homeschool once I started it. I would tell my mom I'm doing it, and I wasn't doing it. And then I ended up getting in more and more trouble over and over again. And then I went to a Louisiana National Guard Youth Challenge program. And for a while there, I thought that I had fixed myself. I graduated top of the class out of 300 cadets, I believe it was, something around that number. So I came home with I'm doing good chip on my shoulder, and it wasn't too much longer after that I began doing all the things that I had quit for those 5.5 months when I was in boot camp. And I came home, and sure enough, I started fighting with my dad because I was doing things that he didn't approve of. And then I finally, we had enough arguments to where I was 18, and I just decided, hey, I'm gonna move in with my grandma. And my grandma, she didn't know much better. I mean, she allowed me to move in not knowing the depth of my problems. She was just extending open arms to me. And, when I moved into my grandma's, my entire life I had strict control over my life. And then when I moved over there with her health problems and sleep patterns, I had all the freedom that I wanted over there. And that's not a good thing to have at the age of 18 when you're already a rebellious kid. And so at 18, I started, just experimenting with every kind of drug you can imagine. And I didn't know the damage that I was causing. I thought I was just young and having fun. And started, going to bars every weekend, blacking out, thinking that was funny. Waking up the next day, seeing videos of me passed out in parking lots, things of that nature. I thought it was, just having fun, being young. And, around 19, one of my friends was already heavily addicted to Percocets. And he actually got kicked out of his house, and I allowed him to move into my bedroom at my grandma's. And, before this, I judged him a little bit for his Percocet addiction. He would, you'd be sitting there having a conversation with him, he'd nod off, and, I judged him, and then one day I just had a bad day, and let me try that, and when I tried the hydrocodones before, I just taken them like a normal pill. And, I told him, man, I don't really like pills. They make you sick. He was like, man, just try snorting a half of one. And for some reason, I listened to him that day. And I fell in love with that half a Percocet. I fell in love with it, and I did them for the next week straight. For some reason, I was off of work for a week straight. And then I went back to work on a Monday, and I didn't have any I didn't do any pills. I wasn't planning on them, but I did them for a week before that. And I go to work, and I'm profusely sweating when it's cold outside. I feel just super anxious. And I was young. I was naive. I didn't know anything about withdrawals and detoxes and all that type of thing when you do pills for a consistent basis like that. And I called him, and I was like, man, what's going on with me? And he was like, oh, I forgot to tell you. If you do pills like that, you're going to either withdraw until you do them again or until you get them out of your system. And being young and naive, I was like, well, I'll just do them again, because I was solving a right now problem. That's how I looked at it. And I just kept doing them. And then, 2 weeks later, I'm heavily addicted to them. And I began to get in legal trouble because I lost my job because I would oversleep. I lost multiple jobs for that. I was not a good worker, and when I was at work, I would either oversleep or I'd show up and I wouldn't be worth anything. So I lost multiple jobs and got arrested, all those types of things. And then slowly I found a cheaper pill, because the ones I were doing were a little expensive. And being young and naive, I didn't realize they were pressed pills. I didn't realize that I was doing fentanyl pills. And the change from, doing real Percocets to doing fentanyl, I couldn't go, before I could go a day or two without them, but then I couldn't go 6 hours without them, and slowly everything in my life began to crumble. I had a great relationship with my grandma, and I slowly, crippled that relationship, and it got to the point where I had to move out of my grandma's house. And at this point, my parents was the last place I had to go, so I moved back into my parents' house, and it didn't work out, but they still allowed me to live there because they didn't want to just put me out on the streets, and I fought with that addiction over, and I went to rehab, came back, do it all over again, and it got to a point where I was just so helpless and hopeless that I didn't know what else to do. And then my daughter was born January 11th of 2023, and I wasn't able to be there when she was born due to my addiction. Nobody wanted me around at that point in my life. So that really hurt, and that caused me to go to rehab again. And you would think with that hurt that I would get it right that time. But I would come home and I would do it all over again. I would relapse, do the whole thing. But this time, I didn't stay relapsed for a while. I was relapsed for less than a month, and then I just made the decision to go back to California again to try and get sober. And this time, it was at all costs. I've got to get it this time. And thankfully, I'll be 2 years sober May 22nd of this year. And that's just a great testimony, because I couldn't, like I said, I couldn't go 6 hours without it, and now I've been 2 years without any type of substance in my body, and that's all from the power of God.
Amazing. Just as you're walking, even though I knew this testimony, your dad's not only my associate pastor, my assistant, your mom's my secretary, but they're also our best friends on a personal level. And I watched your parents, and the only reason I'm bringing this up is not to make you look bad, but there may be some that are watching that are the parents today, or the family members today, or the spouses today. And I remember that, all the different times here, with your dad being in law enforcement, but you're the one getting arrested. and it's, so many times, and I always said I will never say what I would do in that situation, because until you are the one tried with that, you don't know how you react. But there would be times that your dad would say, we're not bailing him out this time, and then 48 hours later we're bailing him out, and I'll be like, whatever, if you want to leave him there, I'll support. I'll go to court with him. I'll do whatever. If you want to bail him out, I'll support whatever you want. But just hearing you say it again and reliving it again, those different types of things, it brings it back fresh. But knowing how much it's come from deep down in your heart, it's really moving. Noah, since you have now came back to God, you said coming up on 2 years sober, what has God restored in your life that you probably thought that you would never be restored to you in your life?
Before I went to rehab, I didn't have, I'm going to start off with the small things and lead up to the big things. Before I went to rehab, I didn't have a license. It was suspended from a previous DUI. I didn't have a vehicle, like I mentioned. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a work ethic, for one. And, when I came home, I was still in that same boat. I didn't have any of those things. And I slowly, thankful to one of the members in our church, he gave me an opportunity to work for him, and he was taking a risk on me because everybody else knew who I was and what I had done for the past years. And he took a risk on me and gave me a job, and I started off with my mom dropping me off every day. No matter where it was, my mom would bring me. And I put it in my mind that, I have to work hard. No matter what I'm getting paid, no matter if I go home to a vehicle, no matter if I have a license, no matter none of those things, I have to work hard. That's the first thing I have to do. And so that's what I did. And, over the next couple of months, I would work to get enough money to pay off my license fees and all those types of things to get my license back, and I still didn't have a vehicle. But at that point, I didn't really need a vehicle. My mom was bringing me where I needed to go, and I know at 21, 22 years old, that's not really what most people want. But at that point in my life, that's what I needed. I needed, restrictions on my life. Not that I was bound to mess up, because this time was really different. But I still needed that in the back of my mind that, hey, you got paid this Friday, but you don't have money. You don't have a vehicle to go, get drugs or go to the bar. Go do anything that your mind tells you, in the back of your mind tells you, oh, you deserve that. And then after working for him for a few months, I started talking to the mother of my daughter again, and it wasn't on, the best of terms, but we hadn't spoken in a while. And slowly, we still had deep amount of love for each other. But, I had hurt her so many times and time again, and we started talking. And then, one day I was at work and I got a phone call from Turner Industries, which is a contractor that works in plants in Texas and Louisiana. And it was a phone call, and my brother-in-law had actually given my number to the person that had called me, and he called me, offered me a job. It was a simple groundskeeping job. It's not really what you want to do, but it was something to keep me going, and I was actually I took this job making less money than I was working for the guy in the church, but it was a better opportunity. It was a chance to get me a future started in my life, and I started that job. And around the same time, me and the mother of my daughter, we got back together, and that was mind-blowing and only a God thing. And I started being able to be around my daughter more. And then after a few months of having this job, I started that job in September, or beginning of August, actually. And November, I believe it was the second week of November, one of the plant managers pulled me into the office, and he offered me a job that he wasn't offering anybody else. He was like, if you want this job, you can sit down on my computer and apply right now and you'll have it. And, I knew immediately I was kind of scared because I didn't know anything about plant work. I was a groundskeeper. I didn't know anything about any of this. And he was like, no worries. We'll train you on everything you need to know. We'll train you on the job. You don't have to go to any types of schooling or anything like that. And so I jumped on it. I applied right then. And, he was like, even though we're offering it to you, it still has to go through upper command. It's not a definite, but we're not offering it to anybody else until they either say yes or no. And, it was a long 2 weeks of waiting for that response. And then they just pulled me into the office and they said, you got it. All you got to go do is take your physical and you're hired. And I thank God for that every day that I got that opportunity. And I started working there December 2nd of 2024. And it's been a blessing from financially to just, I've learned so much from being there. I've gotten ambitions that now I want to go to school to be a plant operator, and it's given me things that I never thought about. I didn't think about my future my entire life. I only thought, the furthest 2 weeks in advance. That was as far as my mind would let me go. And after a few months of working there, I decided to propose to my girlfriend, the mother of my daughter, and she said yes. And last month, April 26th, I was able to marry her in this church where I was born and raised. And all that's a God thing. I couldn't have done it without him. None of these things in my life would be possible. I have my own house now. And all of that is because of God. It's not because of my hands or any other human hand. It's not possible without God's hands.
Well, you may mention something that just came to my mind, about you keep, of course, and I totally agree with you. It's a God moment. Your dad, probably the most popular message your dad's ever preached in this church. I actually had him to preach it a second time one time. Is titled "But God," and so we call it a "But God" moment. If God had been there and done it, and yes, the rehab definitely helped. I remember telling your dad, let him stay there as long as he wants to stay there, and everything. I said that's helping. Family support, all those type of things help. But without God, I don't think it would have lasted. And I believe you agree with that. But in the process of that, what I was getting back to is one of the things that it reminded me of is one of the things that you are heavily involved in the church, that you are now taking your testimony to help someone else. You want to tell us a little bit about what you're involved in?
Yes, sir. I'm involved in the recovery program that we offer at jails. We actually have one on Tuesday nights that another brother in our church teaches. Here at our church, they bring a work release employees to our church, and they teach a recovery program. And me and another guy, we have a Thursday night class at the West Feliciana work release. And, with these recovery programs, I started off as a student, obviously. The same brother that teaches the class on Tuesdays taught me multiple times. Even though he didn't get anywhere with me, he still, every time that we were supposed to be there, he was there. Whether I showed up or not, he was always there. And that kind of instilled in me that if I don't do it for somebody else, then he did it for me. So I feel bound that I'm supposed to do it for others because, we're renewed by the testimony of others, So I feel as if I have to do that. That's a part of my calling now, is to share my testimony with others and try to bring others into this help that I receive. And on Thursdays, I look forward to Thursdays. And I tell the guys at that jail all the time that this helps me just as much, if not more, than it helps them. Because it gives me a drive and a motivating factor to keep proving that it can be, this can happen for you, because it's happened for me. And I was just as bad as an addict as any other one, So I know for a fact that if God can do it for me, he can do it for anybody. And I've seen it. It's a wonderful thing to go to class, and at the one we have, they offer them good time to go through this class, and the first week, a lot of them will come in there just for the good time. That's their motivating factor, and I get that, because if I would have been in jail and they offered me good time, I would have took it too. But it's a powerful thing to see them come in only for that, and then on that 8th week, you see a completely different person than you started out with, and that's just that is what motivates me to keep going in this, is knowing that I can help others relieve themselves of the pain that they dealt with for years, and it's a powerful thing.
And I totally agree with you. Being the senior pastor, I have been able to, the one we offer here on site is for East Feliciana work release, where they bring them here, and then of course West Feliciana is the one that you're involved in, and then you've been even involved in some that we do just one-on-one or on site here, even on a Sunday. But one of the things that I've always said, I didn't grow up with that background. That don't make me better than anybody else, just like you didn't grow up, but you end up falling into that. I never have. I've never taken the first drug in my life. I've, anything. I've never had those addictions. Don't make me any better. If it hadn't been for the mercies of God, where would I be? But one thing I've always said is, I can't relate to a lot of those guys. I can't. If I sit there and say, I understand what you're going through, they're going to look at me like you're crazy, because I don't. It would be a lie. But to sit there and watch, we have 3 instructors, our lead instructor, Brother Sidney McDaniel, and then of course you, and then Brother Garrett Wilson. All 3 of y'all have experienced this. Y'all have experienced the deliverance. Y'all have experienced not only of God, of the programs helping you, but the God's Spirit, being filled with His Spirit, and that delivering power to help keep you and to sustain you. And so when somebody like that can relate, it makes so much of a difference. In our closing here, we'll wrap it up here with this. Noah, there's a lot of people who may feel like they don't have any hope. They don't have nowhere to turn. They've tried everything. Maybe they've tried rehab time and time again. Maybe their families gave up on them. Maybe their friends gave up on them. They can't hold a job down. Whatever it is, just it's kind of like your story. But in the closing of this interview, would you like to take a moment just to speak directly to them about, and not trying to put words in your mouth, but something that you said a while ago, if God did it for you, God can do it for them.
Yeah, I can remember, before I got sober, before I went to rehab that last time, I remember sitting in drug houses and, hoping. It was a bad point in my life where I was hoping, this pill would take me out, because I felt like that would solve all the problems that I had. I knew it would hurt everybody around me, but in my messed up mind, I was like, well, at least it'll just be one last hurt, and I won't have to, keep hurting them for years and years, because I felt like I was trapped in this. I felt like there was no way that I could get clean and stay clean, because like I said, I've been to rehab, and I would get clean, and then I wouldn't stay clean. I think I've been to rehab 6 or 7 times. A few times I didn't stay 2 or 3 days, and other times I completed, and I'd come home and I'd give people hope, and then I knew what I was coming home to do. It's a mindset change that you have to have. It's a final breaking point that I got to. Like I mentioned, when I wasn't able to be there for the birth of my daughter, that really hurt. And that really, I didn't want I felt like I was stealing from my daughter, to the fact that I was raised in this Pentecostal way. I had grandparents that were before my parents, and I was going to be raising my daughter in a family where she was just with her mom, living with her grandparents, and her dad was going to be a drug addict, and I felt hopeless, and I felt like there was no way out for me. That's why I mentioned that I would sit in drug houses and hope that pill would take me out, but it didn't. I've overdosed many a times, and every time I would wake up, and I finally got to a point where I have to have a purpose. Each and every one of us drug addicts knows somebody that's died, knows somebody close to us that's died, and even non-drug addicts. We all know somebody that's died earlier than we thought they should have, and kids that died, all those things. And I was still here after the years of hurting others, stealing from others. I still was here. So I had to have a purpose, and at that moment, I didn't know what my purpose was. I'm starting to feel like I'm stepping into my purpose. But it was years and years of drug addictions that had broken me down to a point where I thought death was the only answer. And a death that I knew I was going to hell. And I knew that I was not right with the Lord. But I felt like eternal suffering for myself in hell was better than trying to fix it all and get it right. And, the last time I went to rehab, I got on the plane to California, and I said, either I'm going to fix it here or I'm going to stay here and not bother anybody back home, because I didn't want to be a burden that I had been on everybody. And I went to rehab this time, and like I mentioned, rehab it helped me because it took me away from all the things I was struggling with. But when I got to rehab, I started reconnecting with God. It had been years since I had prayed a genuine, sincere prayer, and every night I would pray, and I didn't really know how to pray because it had been so long since. It's just like anything. Prayer, you get better at it with practicing and praying more. And I would pray every night, and I would thank God for keeping me here, keeping me alive. And at that point, I really didn't mean it. I really would rather have been taken out. But it was through that first few weeks of detox where I started feeling a little bit better physically. And as I began to get better physically, the mental part got worse because the devil had started to fight me more because I thought he knew that I was on my way out of this drug addiction, and at first it was I wanted to just join in with the crowd of the other patients at the rehab, and I'd done that all the other times, but this time I stayed close to the workers. I started talking, because I was lucky to go to a rehab where it was all former addicts. They had all dealt with drug addiction, alcohol abuse, things of that nature. So I finally got to a point where I started trusting other people other than myself, and people I felt comfortable with, because a drug addict feels comfortable around a drug addict. And as I began to work on myself physically and mentally, I began to grow, and I didn't feel as hopeless. But it was all because I made up in my mind that I can't do it on my own. I can't do it with the help of rehab. I had to get on my knees every night and ask God, I need your help. I need you to show me the way. Show me how to get past this. And eventually, I got months of clean time, and I decided it was time to come home. And that was, it felt like I was doing it all over again, because when I came home, the devil knew that was his grounds, because California was kind of a safe spot for me because I didn't do drugs there. But when I came home, I had that same hopeless feeling when I stepped off the plane, because I didn't have all those things that I mentioned earlier. And I had to fight through that. It's a fighting process. Every day you have to fight. It's not going to get easier. Every day, still to this day, I have moments where I think about going back, which I never would. But it's a mental battle that the devil tries to play games in your mind, show you different things that you might miss. But it's a miss that you're never going to want to go back to, because you know what it's going to bring you. And it's something that I tell the guys at the recovery class, that it's like a fork in the road. We can either go down this road that we know what's going to happen. We know what this drug addiction is going to lead to, or we can step into this other way that God's guiding our hand, and He has so much in store for us. Because I didn't have anything when I came home, and now I mentioned all the things that I have, and I come from hopeless and helpless to just being completely redeemed in God, and all the power and glory goes to Him.
So amazing. As we conclude this with this, I couldn't help but think we could go this past Saturday as I was able to stand here and officiate your wedding, and your great wife, who is also watch your little daughter be a flyer girl. Y'all are all three members of this church, and just the grace and the mercies of God. And it's the thought just came to my mind, and we'll say this, and we'll conclude this interview, that I started to tell you that the chapters are being still written. But it was almost like it came to me that, no, a new book is being written. No, you can't do away with your past. But there's a part of that you really, yeah, would you like to wipe the slate clean and all the hurt? Yeah, and all that. But the only thing now you are taking, you close one book. And instead of starting a new chapter, you started a new book. But sometimes you got to go back to the old book so you can help somebody while you're in your new book. And so when you came back in that journey and God putting all these things back together, the redemption, and now the marriage, you're just adding chapters and chapters of the new book. And I couldn't help but think, this is only the beginning. This is only the beginning of what God is going to do. I would like to say, if you are searching, maybe you watch this video and maybe you say, that's my life story. I promise you, there's hope, there's restoration, there's redemption. We'd be glad to help you. I'm a pastor that pastors a church that welcomes all, regardless of your background, regardless of your race, regardless of your culture, regardless of any of that. We're here to help. We have church on Sundays we have enrichment classes and Sunday school classes at 10 a.m. And then at 11:30 we have worship service. Wednesday night also worship services. But we want to be able to help. Contact us. We will be there for you to help you have the same redemption, the same deliverance that Brother Noah Sagely has experienced. But God bless you. God keep you. And if you need us at all, please feel free to reach out to us in Jesus' name.